session. Welcome, everybody. I'm really happy you joined. I'm pretty sure you can see my screen and maybe my video, so I will continue. First of all, thank you for all the sponsors for today. It's a huge event, and we are really happy to have this fantastic sponsors here to be involved and make this event happen. A few words from my person. To my person, I am CEO and co-founder of a small company specialized in the topics between Microsoft 365, Skype for Business, and Microsoft Teams migrations, all the changes behind that, technical, organizational changes, and last but not least, the digital workplace. I do have experience with Microsoft UC over more than a decade, and usually work with global players, global enterprise environments, and customers. And last but not least, I'm a host for a Teams user group in Germany. What can you expect for the session today? I would like to raise some attention and also discuss what's behind the general statement lifecycle management. What is lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams or in the Teams perspective? What kind of tools do we have to create lifecycle management? And which tool makes it comfortable? So first of all is what lifecycle management stands for. Basically, it's a process to control the whole life cycle. And life cycle is a kind of easy word. So what is the real purpose behind that? What's a real background for that? Basically, life cycle is more than just the creation of something. It's also maintaining during the runtime and also let the whatever it is die at the end and clean up. The first and second, and maybe the last step is or second step, third step is already known, but the cleanup is also very important for that. I will come to this in the next slides. And if you do have a life cycle process, you already thought about it, you have a specification about the life cycle, you know what this life cycle is about. You also have to rethink about the existing life cycle when you get a change, an internal change, an external change, which affects your current life cycle procedure. So, for example, you have something which requires specific permissions, and those permissions are bound to a user or an admin. And this admin leaves the company. His account will shut down as well. So you have to react, or there's a new department, a new person involved in the whole lifecycle management, in the whole maybe in the process where you get some approvals. And those changes always affect your existing process and your existing lifecycle process. So you have to rethink about that and react if there are some steps already specified. Also, lifecycle management should be easy for the users. So the users actually don't have to care about what happens with all the data in the background. What about the creation? As a user, I just want to have a team, or I just want to have a channel in a team. So I don't care about all the technical requirements in the back end. I don't care about what's necessary to fulfill my personal requirement. And the same for a team which is maybe untouched for more than a year, or actually I want to delete it. I don't want to think about it. What's going on with my data? What's happening in the background? I'm just a user. I just want to click somewhere or maybe just ignore it. I don't want to be the IT guy who is responsible for all the technical stuff in the back end. On the opposite side, the IT should create some processes, some life cycle processes to bring some very, very easy steps to the users, but make it safe on the backend side as well. So there should also be some ideas behind the life cycle for some failures. For example, you create a step for the deletion of a team. You also should cover the recovery of a team if there was a mistake, some misclicks, maybe the wrong request, manual or automatical issue behind that. Also for the management of a team, if you add something like an app or you create a new team, it should not affect the existing environment. It should not affect the current settings. So make it safe. There are a couple of ways, and I will talk about this in a couple of minutes. But why it's so hard to handle that? From my point of view, it's definitely the focus. So when you talk about life cycle, you have different aspects to consider. I want to show you some of them. The obvious part is the team itself. So you want to have a team, that's fine, but what's behind that? From an IT perspective, I usually want to create a team. Who is allowed to create a team? Is it allowed for every user? Is it allowed in a direct interface? If it's allowed for all users in Teams, does it make sense to restrict something, to create something in the backend, like a naming policy where a prefix or suffix can be added automatically in a team? That's something you should care about the creation in the creation process. Not only the technical part, how to create, but also the governance part. Is there any requirement from the IT perspective to use a specific prefix or suffix? Is there anything else like policies we have to add? That's also something you have to care in the whole life cycle. The hardest part is to identify the life cycle parts and then specify the requirements. In this case, in a team, usually you have the question, should I add some apps? And the apps, yeah, which app? Which app is actually allowed? That's another question you should answer in your organization or in your customer organizations, because usually you have a huge bunch of third-party apps, integrated apps. You can build some apps. You can use some tools or some bots in it. That's a lot. And as an IT department, you should specify what app or bot or whatever I've mentioned before is allowed to bring into my environment. In this case, identify it and just allow it. You have some policies in the back end. you have some restrictions or possibilities to restrict the access, also for specific or allow access to specific apps, especially for some users you identified as a trusted or experienced user. In most of the cases, you have some apps where the developer are very, very good in, but it's maybe not the right tool or the right app for the regular users. So you can specify some groups in the backend, but think about it and identify your governance. What about the users itself? Basically, you have two different roles, right? You have owner, you have users, and that's it. That's good. But how many users, how many owners do you want to allow in a team? Usually, a single owner is not the right starting point, because if you create a team and you have a single owner in it, just a single person is able to change settings, invite members, and see what's going on with all the with my team, and maybe also from the permission level, create some channels, interact with the users, delete content or mistakes or whatever the owner should do and maybe has to do. And in this case, my recommendation is usually at least 2 owners. But on the other side, don't think just give everyone the owner permission, then I'm good. Because if you have too many owners, you have too many users who are able to affect the whole team. And in most situations, those users think, let me switch on this feature, let me switch on this app over here. And it's more for testing instead of real purpose. And also, if you have too many owners, who's responsible for running the team? Who is responsible for the decisions? Who should be invited? And how to handle all the general questions to the team? Who is the guy? The person who should be can be asked from the IT department if you have any questions over there. Lifecycle is also, and you should create a process for the owner if someone is leaving the company. That's something you have to consider as well. So maybe integrate a process which is checking all teams about the number of owners in a team, and send a notification to the owners, the existing owners, is definitely a good idea to ensure you do have at least 2 owners in there. For data, it's more obvious from my perspective. If you handle data in a team, you want to care about the data, not from a security perspective, as we heard before, but also for the for the life cycle of those data or in a team. Creation is pretty easy in the most cases. If you have a local file store, the first question is which data can be stored in a cloud and what happens to the local data. So it's important to understand it's a standalone copy. In this case with local data, but it's standalone data. And what happens if the project, the team has finished the purpose or has reached the purpose? So they completed the project. The users say, okay, I'm good. Now let's delete everything here. at least you have to get the data out of your team if you want to delete it for some regulation permissions. Every country has different regulations, but they exist in almost every country. So if someone is requesting to get some ideas why this and this decision came up, who approved that decision, or who signed this document, then you should be able to provide the right answer over there. So creation is easy, maintaining maybe. Is it necessary to create a backup? It depends on your consultant answer. It depends on your strategy. I have companies who say, that's good for me. I just want to save the data, which gets a specific label and retention policy, keep it in the cloud for a specified time and date. And I've got other customers, other companies who say, okay, let me save data on a daily basis in the cloud, on a different space, different storage, maybe not Microsoft related, or local backup, to do it as we did before, or to save our data on a second layer. And last but not least, if you want to delete the team, you may have to consider the data within. Should it delete it, or should something be saved in a different place? Something the most companies are not aware of is the general question about guests. Once again, the creation, the invite of guests is so easy. And that's good, because you want to work with external parties to complete your project. They're a very important part of your project. So invite is pretty easy, but you get a local object in your Azure AD. So it's something on your side which got created and granted access to the team. And when you get those guests in it, you're not aware of the external side of your guests. So my general example is, you have a guest who's working for a consultant company. He's good. He has a brilliant job. He's leaving his company, going to another company, to another consultant company. Usually he will work in the same project, but there's another company. So you have a second account. What happens to the first one? Is this still the same user with the permissions? Is the user maybe deleted on the other side? So what happens to this guest? And you can use multiple scenarios for that. Inviting internal users are inviting their private accounts to test something. What happens to with those accounts? What happens to those accounts when they leave the company? Those are some scenarios you have to consider for not only lifecycle, but for governance as well. Now, what's possible to do with Microsoft tools? Some of them I already mentioned before. You can create something like naming policies. You're able to create Office 365 group management policies, retention policies, and also create some group expirations policies. Basically, these policies are able to check the last activity in the team, and based on your settings, you get a notification or the team will be deleted after X days of inactivity in a team. Inactivity is usually something you have when the team is not used anymore, no chat messages, nothing on a user level has been done, no document movement, something like an incoming email doesn't count in this case. Just if you just think about a newsletter coming in on a regular basis and keeps the whole team up and running for ages, doesn't make sense. So real user activity is a key over here. Naming policies and group expiration is based on Azure P1. There's another level which I want to tell you here is guest management in Azure P2. With the license Azure P2 or Microsoft 365 E5, Office 365 E5, you get Azure AD access reviews, and those access reviews are some features, or is a feature where you are able to request the owner, but also the guest to check the access level for teams and apps in a team. So for example, you can establish a process where all teams will be checked every month or every quarter to verify all those guests still required for the project. And then there's a process where the owner can say, okay, yes, I do need the guests here. Or the guest can decide, is it still necessary for myself to be part of this team? And yeah, that's pretty handy, but also not the cheapest solution over here. There are some other solutions, and that's something I will show you with Power Automate. In the meantime, there was a rebrand. So with Power Automate, you're able to run some dependencies on a user level. That's it's something you can use as a user, always in your context, always is your permissions. You're able to run something like a workflow. If an incoming email from this the sender, you will get a message into a team, for example, or you create some task in a planner, or if the planner if something happens in your planner, in your specific planner task, you get another event right after that. So there's this a huge range of possible scenarios and actions over here, and they can be used on a user level, but they can share it for a team as well. Anyhow, they are still running in a specific user context with specific user permissions. So if you want to run a couple of administrative tasks, you should create the service account over there. With the Microsoft Graph API, you are able to do some some task in the back end. So for example, with the Graph API, that's an underlying structure in the back end of all Microsoft 365 products, and you get access to this Graph API to trigger an event, and this event happens in the back end. I will show this in a demo in a couple of minutes. You can use some templates. You can use some. You can get some information direct out of the products. So for example, requesting an username, email address, something like that, you can use the Graph API for managing admin, mailboxes, SharePoints, Teams, part of Teams like apps. You're able to manage shifts in the backend. Graph API is the underlying important part of Microsoft 365, also for security features, for Windows 10, all the stuff Microsoft provides you. So when we take a look into something more IT related, then you get another option, which is Azure Automation. Azure Automation is something in Azure, it's quite obvious, where you are able to run scripts, logical steps behind that, small parts to reuse them. So you don't have a static script. You can create something like functions, and those functions can be used in runbooks, which are, for example, you create a virtual machine. That's a default standard example for Microsoft as well, to add some disks over here, change the IP addresses or add some IP addresses, make some configuration changes. You can, and as you would do it on a regular PowerShell script or something, or other scripts, you have some functions maybe over there. You can take those small functions and put them into Azure Automation, and then just request the small function one by one, either by flow or via webhook or whatever. You have a couple of different scenarios where you can trigger some those runbooks, those events. Sorry, those automation steps. And to make this safe, you can use accounts with username, password. Not really recommended, to be honest, but also add some certificates and something like a client app with a secret key in the backend. So there are various options to get those Azure Automation features up and running and safe as well. Okay. When we take a look into Power Automate or Flow, maybe you have seen something like this before. Those are the current triggers and actions from Teams in Power Automate directly. And you take a look over those, you see the triggers on the right, on your left side. There are just 3 different triggers. You may have some other scenarios where you want to start an action. In this action area on the right side, you see a couple of different actions over here, and we have got a bit more about shifts. So there are, I think, 10 or 15 more about shifts. They are not included in the screenshot because it's all about shifts, accepting, rejecting, shift change. So I decided to keep it this. For the general Teams handling, you get a lot of different features. But when you start to get, when you want to start with something like more specific configuration, create something like a team with a specific app, then it's more difficult to use those Power Automate or Flow features over here. I mentioned before, Microsoft Graph is the underlying and very important feature in the backend. It's basically the gateway, the contact part for all your applications. It's for identity, it's for security, it's involved in Windows 10, Office 365, all about the enterprise and mobility suites, all these features in the backend. Microsoft also put something like Yammer into it. So basically every app in the backend from Microsoft can be addressed, requested, and interacted with via Graph. You can use it for web apps, bots, and background processes, which are basically very important for all your IT stuff in the backend. With just a quick overview over here, with a Graph API, you are able to actually complete the full life cycle over here. So you're able to create a team, add members, configure teams like settings, set settings over there, set some install apps, add channels, create tabs, and last but not least, archive and delete teams. So you have an almost complete life cycle over here, but there's still more. With the Graph API, you're not just able to create the lifecycle about the creation of a team. You're also able to create something or to address some commands for chat, calling, scheduling, shifts. And they are still developing the whole Graph API as the whole cloud services. But the Graph API will provide more commands and capabilities over the next months. So please check it out. If you have a specific scenario, go and check out if it's possible over here. Is it possible to use Graph API? For the creation process, you have a very, very great start with different templates. So Microsoft decided to provide a couple of templates for the basic, very important scenarios the most customers have. So you have a specific area where the customers are, retail, for example. And for retail, you do have some very unique requirements. And for those requirements, you get a template which can be used via Graph API and requested as a default template for the new team without any special configuration. And that's the same for education, healthcare, for the different scenarios. So you can just say, create a team with this template, and you're good to go. You can find the specific settings for these templates in the documentation at Microsoft Docs. So another option, and it's pretty common, is to create a new team which fits for 80-90% of my internal teams, or create multiple teams to address different scenarios, and use those existing teams as a template for new teams. So you can copy teams also via Graph API. My recommendation is to use it when you have very unique requirements and you want to provide something like a default setting for project management, for example. You always want to add some specific tools or apps, connections. You can use it like a template. What's necessary to use the Graph API? Basically, you have three pillars and very important requirements here. You have to create an Azure AD application. And this Azure AD application gives you a client ID. And with this client ID, you are able to address the application. With the secret and the client ID, you are able to address the secret, the Azure AD app. And you can use this Azure AD app to fulfill your task with the specified permissions over there. You need the tenant ID and the template ID if there is something other as a standard default. So I would like to jump in over here in a very common scenario. It's a creation of a team. When we take a look into the creation of a team, so first of all, this is my demo tenant here. And you can see the demo tenant already has some teams. And now I want to provide an easy interface for the users, which is built in Microsoft Forms. I've created a small form, which is just asking for the stuff the IT department requires for the Teams creation. So basically, the IT department is requesting me to put any name here. So, okay, that's fine. The purpose, the description, test and demo. And there's another question, is this project for internal people only? Yes, it is. And I just hit the submit button and I'm good. That's the user side. Oh no, sorry. Over there. So that's a user side. Okay, now I've got the submission. That's a user side. And basically, this team will appear over here. That's great. So the user side is really, really straightforward. There's no crazy things to handle. But what's in the background? I've mentioned there you should have access to an Azure AD application. And this Azure AD application you can find in the Azure Active Directory. Check out the app registrations. And here you see there is an app named Teams Creation. I want to show you all the stuff when you create a new team, a new application behind that. You click on New Application, and let me put it in here. M365 Virtual Marathon. Access for internal accounts only. That's good. I can decide if there are multi-tenant. Is it a multi-tenant environment? Is it also for users externally? But for now, or for this app, it's fine to just address it for internal users. Okay, let me a bit scroll out over here. You see there is a new app. Hey, hooray! And you can see the application ID, the client ID on the very top over here. So yeah, cool. I've got almost everything I need. Yes, almost. You have to identify, you have to specify the permissions. And those permissions has to be granted. So take a look into the permissions you want to assign or to grant here. In my case, I want to check all the permissions from Microsoft Graph as an application. So it should run as a daemon, as a background process. No user permissions or user sign-in required. And I would like to create a group. And not only create, maybe want to read it as well. And oh yeah, I want to set group members as well. So that's good. I have to consent the requested permissions. So that's maybe something, if you are not the tenant administrator has to grant, but you can request it as this. In this case, I just want to grant it. I am, of course, the tenant administrator, just to avoid any issues for the demo. And now you have the permissions for this app, but there's still something you have to provide, the secret. And this secret is pretty easy. You can assign a certificate or a secret over here. I want to create a secret, demo secret for a year, to or never expire. And here it is. And now a very important point, please write it down, copy it, save it somewhere, because this value will be hidden afterwards. So it's just available for the time of the creation. Check it here. I go over there. There are some more options which can be used for scenarios where you have an interface and interaction between the user and the app. But in our case, we don't have that. I take a look into over here. Oh, cool. Let me show you this over here. You can see it's not readable anymore, and it was created by the same user, just in a different application. So it will disappear if you haven't copied it, saved it anywhere. You may lose it when you try to get access into the next. But yeah, that's a fundamental requirements when you want to create a team via Graph API. And now in my specific scenario, I've used a flow, which is in Power Automate, sorry. And in this flow, I have done just a very, very basic settings over here. There are some, there's a form, that's this here. I'm checking there, the trigger is when a new form was submitted. I'm getting the details. I'm filling up some variables over here, the name, the description, external guests allowed, yes or no. And after that, I'm looking for who was the creator of this form, because it's an internal form. I've got and it's not anonymous. I've got the user behind the submission. And now I come to the Graph API. The Graph API can be addressed via different HTTP request procedures. You can start with a GET. You can drop in and post to trigger an action on the Graph API. You have, yeah, basically the GET and the post are the very most often used. Let me put it over there. And then in this case, you have a action which is called HTTP. And this HTTP action is something you have to pay extra for. Some premium features like these, HTTP or even webhook events actions require a specific license, at least P1, or to enable this. In my case, I just started with a trial version. You have to address where the which part of graph should be used, and then you have a lot of text over here. This is basically the description of my requested team. So you can find something like an app over here, Teams app, which is YouTube, including a description. You can see the display name of the channel over here, training, announcement. All the settings has to be addressed here if I want to ensure they are set on this level I decided that. And last but not least, every team creation requires at least one owner. In this case, this is something you are not able to find in this default standard example from Microsoft. You have to add this from another example, but it's required. So basically, when you take a look into this configuration, I would say, hey, cool, every user can use it. But yeah, it's not working because the Graph API is is reachable for every user, but it's also checking the credentials you are working with. That means if you're a regular user, you are able to request some information in your context, with your permissions. You don't get more information as you would do when you use a regular app into Microsoft 365. So that's the part where the Azure AD app comes in. So I would like to start this request to the Graph API in the context with the permission of the Azure AD app. And in this case, I changed the authentication to Azure AD OAuth. I can leave it the authority basically blank because the default is login.windows.net. But I have to insert the tenant ID. As you remember, you got the tenant ID over here. Let me use this here. You get the tenant ID over here, direct from the Azure AD app. Put in here a bit more. You have to address what you are interested in to trigger. What's the target? The client ID, once again, from the app. You have to identify how you want to authenticate against the app. In our case, it's via secret, and I use this secret over here to address my Azure AD app. That's it. It's all the magic behind that. In the meantime, I've got my team. I've got an app poly in it, different channels. I got a broken link actually. But yeah, you can see there's really some customization over here, also from the naming, but from the tabs over here as well. And that shows us I can use Graph API, maybe create a bit more flexible stuff over here. So for example, I can create the full JSON format, the full description of a team, by extending the form. For example, request for more information, how many channels, and yeah, I can do it really, really complex. And of course, I can use the same scenario for deleting, moving data, all the stuff in the background, because it's a Graph API in the backend. Okay. From my point of view, you should consider how to manage the lifecycle management, the lifecycle from Teams. Basically, for the IT department, it's good to use a direct configuration via PowerShell, Office Graph API, Azure Automation, because you are able to use more flexible ways. You do have the permissions and the knowledge behind for the backend. On a user level, there are the Power Apps where you can create UI for some flows, or Power Automate, put some intelligence behind, or in a huge good looking app. You are able to create flows for a kind of life cycle. Maybe if it's just you get a approval process for the Teams LifeCycle Management. So for example, you get an email with a specific subject or from a specific sender, then you trigger a new email to the IT department, or maybe if you have the permissions, then you maybe start the creation of a team. And last but not least, you can use SharePoint as well. You can use SharePoint list for the creation or deletion of a team. This is just the interface for the user, and the backend is pretty similar to this, what you have seen so far. The trigger is just a change in the list. And also for the user perspective, there's a new app from Microsoft available. I forgot to put it in here, where you're able to request teams with a huge, with a good-looking UI, with a approval process, but you have to involve the IT department when you want to get it up and running. The last part is use a right tool for you. So decide it, make your choice, but please always use Microsoft Graph. Once again, Graph API is the very important part. It's underlying everything from Microsoft 365. I've put it in some reference links for the information. There are some information available, a ton actually. I've put in an example how to create your provisioning flow. On the very end of the site, you can see the Graph Explorer, and the Graph Explorer is a graphical interface to test your graph requests. So you can start to work with a interface. You drop in your URL, your graph request, and you can see the result afterwards. That makes it more easy for you to check the.
You're in the meeting. You are in the meeting.
Pardon me, Michael.
Yeah.
Very sorry to interrupt, but we do need to conclude the session so that we can prepare for the next speaker.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm really at the end.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome. If you want, just connect, and yeah, the last slide is actually this one, and now I'm